moving forward to take what we learned today and work that into the exploration of our various pathways. Can you hear me?
Yes, but you're cloudier than you were before.
I know. I think that my device is. Let me see what happens if I do this.
Did something run out of power, or?
I think something ran out of power. Needs to be charged. Does this do anything? No. No.
I mean, we can hear you. It's just a little cloudier.
Yeah, that was what my new. How about that? No difference?
No.
Well, I'm going to have to go to my engineer. I have resident engineers that are helping me with this stuff.
Okay, but we can hear you. It's you know, we can.
It can be heard? Okay. Well, how about, is this just the same bad?
Sounds same, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. Then I won't stick that thing in my ear. This the one, the new one needs to be charged.
It was working better for a while, and then all of a sudden it just stopped.
Yeah, I think if I fired it up again, it would say in that fake voice, that Siri type voice, it would say something about you have no percent.
Yeah.
0%. Okay. So what we want to do is look at our next step, and so based on what we talked about today already, continuing research and continuing to refine your materials, and this next one is a focus on your business card. So let's go and take a look at. I need to share my screen, right?
Girls.
Share my screen.
Yep, there we go. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was looking at these guys in here, so I just went to Behance and looked at graphic designers to follow. So if you're planning to be a graphic designer, that would be something to, maybe you're already doing that. But we're also refining materials and just getting into an area where you plan to go and see what other people are doing in that area and how to increase your visibility, how to show your work. There was a question. Ye said she wanted to know about the about copyrights, and I have something here that's about copyrights, and let's see. So this is by somebody who did a Miles Davis cover, and did a rendition. He was doing kind of a special thing where he wasn't really getting money for it, but he made this image from the cover of Kind of Blue, which is one of the top records of the 20th century. And so he was sued because this was too close to this. And I was wondering, well, what would you need to do not to get sued? And so I thought, well, I did this. This is my version. I tried to get it to as few pixels as possible, but then someone else suggested this.
There you go.
Well, there you go. I bet that would win in a copyright. You wouldn't get sued for that.
Would get sued for that, but I would probably still be sued for this.
Maybe.
Well, you know, it's pretty close. Look at that.
People like suing.
Yeah, it's true.
And so when they sued Shepard Fairey for the Hope poster that he did from a photo that a photographer took a picture of Obama, and Shepard Fairey did the Hope poster, adapting it to, and he wasn't getting any money for it. This was a political contribution type of thing. But he didn't give credit to the original photographer, and that guy came after him, sued him for a lot of money. So and John and I were talking before class a little bit about copyright.
Are we playing the creep song? I hear music in the background.
I don't have anything on it here. Somebody may. Anyway, so that even if you were to get these three, it's always best to use your own work. And as John was saying at the beginning of class, could you repeat what you were saying, John, at the beginning of class about when you were talking about copyrights for things online?
Yeah, you know, copyrights are not simple. I mean, the concept is simple, but in terms of like if you can be sued and something, it's actually murky, and there are a lot of factors that go into whether or not somebody can sue you for copyright and win, copyright infraction.
And they have to like send you a cease and desist letter first or something?
Well,
Maybe.
maybe, but well, first off, anybody can sue anybody for anything. I mean,
Right.
nothing stops anybody from suing you. It's a question of if you win or not.
Right.
But you know, the couple of basics. Any original work that you create is considered your work, and it's considered that you own the copyright upon creation. But if you don't register the copyright with the government, it's harder to prove. And the main advantage to registering copyright is that if something goes to court, if you win, you get court fees. You get the other side's, you get your legal fees paid, which is not necessarily true even if you win, but you don't register the copyright. And legal fees are, you know, can be thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars. So if you are an artist or a photographer or a designer, if you're creating original works, you know, it's a modest fee to register copyright, and you can gang a bunch of works together and call it a collection and copyright a bunch of stuff at once. They have raised the fees, so the basic fee, I'm looking online, $65. $45 for a very simple one work, you're the author kind of registration. But if you want to do a group of works that you created, which is more efficient, you can register a whole bunch of things as a collection for $65. And that's relatively modest compared to something like, you know, patents and trademarks, which cost thousands of dollars. So you probably want to do that. And also, you know, anytime you publish something, you should always put a copyright notice on it. You know, if it's serious, you might want to consult an attorney if you have a lot of work to copyright and it has commercial value. But you should be aware that, you know, you do own what you create, and even if you don't register it. And so if somebody is using your work and you didn't give them permission, you do have the right to tell them to cease and desist, and it is yours whether or not you register it. Just registering it does give you legal advantages.
Okay.
How's that in a nutshell?
Where
Yeah.
do you register for a
Oh,
copyright?
one more thing. A lot of people ask questions about fair use, saying, well, I'm using it under the fair use doctrine, doesn't that cover me? And, there are a lot of ins and outs around fair use. And as my friend who's an intellectual property law attorney says, fair use is not something I would ever hang my hat on. It's very murky. It's not legally clear how it works. And it's really not something you just want to rely on unless you're really crystal clear about what's going on. So the bottom line is, if you're using anybody else's work in something, even if it's a derivative work like this Miles Davis thing, you have to be really, really careful.
Where do you register for a copyright?
Julie, I don't know if you're talking, but you're muted.
Where do you register for a copyright?
Don't hear you.
It's on your end then.
I
I
can
can
hear
hear
it.
fine.
Yeah, I can hear Julie too.
Oh, you know what? Maybe it's me. I think it's my system.
Today is technical difficulty day.
I think it was my speaker got
Yeah.
turned off. Sorry.
Oh,
Now I'm sorry, it was my speaker. But could you
Okay.
say whatever you said again for the recording, because it didn't catch it?
Yeah, someone else had asked where do you register the copyright? Where do you
With
register for it?
with copyright.gov.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
it's fairly easy. Yeah, you can easily register copyrights without an attorney. If you want to trademark something, that's a bit more expensive and pretty much requires an attorney.
Okay. Well, so that's about copyright. And I'm going to take Miles off here. I thought he did a pretty good one. Could you tell? Would you have been able to tell? It's kind of blue, that one right here.
One on the left, one on the right, not so much.
Okay, I think I am still sharing my screen, and I wanted to get into, let's just go into Canvas and take a look at this over here. Sometimes our little, oh, there it popped in.
Oh, one more thing on copyright while you're looking at something, Beth. There's this myth that what you can do is, when you have something that you create, instead of registering the copyright, you mail it to yourself, and somehow that is going to give you some kind of rights or protection. And any copyright attorney will tell you that's kind of nonsensical. So just mailing something to yourself does virtually nothing. So don't rely on that either. It's a common.
Yeah, I've heard that before, and that's weird.
It's a common myth, and it's not true.
All right.
I'm gonna mail myself a $100 bill. See where that gets me.
No, in that case, you mail it to me, P.O. Box 7624, Santa Cruz 95006.
All right.
All right. So this is more research and delivery. So this is firming up your plans. And you're going to be creating another page. That's why I wanted to talk about. That's part of the reason that DM2 is a prereq for this class, is that creating pages takes a little know-how in that department. And it just ensures that anything that you put out there as far as for clients or anything like that is, about how to share that. One of the things that I can't do in here is a hanging indent right here. Just they don't have that in canvas. But I think that actually probably if I were to edit this right here is where I would find that. So this is where all of you coders get in here and find out how to make a hanging indent in here. Right, John?
I think he disappeared.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. I'm sorry, what? Right, right.
This is how you would make a hanging indent in here. This is the, I was looking at, I want a hanging indent there, but I can't seem to get it in any of these controls. And
I'm not sure Canvas gives you that level of fine control.
well, can't you make a hanging indent in HTML?
You can, and I can't really read that, but it's really small for my eyes.
Yeah, well,
But there are ways if you know basic HTML code, you can go in and stick code into things like a WordPress page or something like this. Now I can actually read it. There you go.
Enlarged it. So
there you go.
I could go in there if I knew HTML and I could make myself a hanging indent.
You could. Yes, you could.
Okay. Well, that speaks to, if you're going to be using Canvas for stuff, speaks to knowing how to edit HTML, because I'm going to get back to my rich text editor where I can't do it.
Unfortunately, with a system like Canvas, I was just looking at that code. With a system like Canvas and other systems that shield you from things like some kind of content management systems where you can't really get too far under the hood, what Canvas does is it is true that you can, on a per page basis, you can go into the code and you can edit it so you can style things like a hanging indent or an initial cap, a drop cap, something like that. But Canvas does not allow you to get too far under the hood. In other words, you cannot edit the style sheet that controls the look and feel of all your pages, which would be the efficient way to set styles. Instead, you have to do it in the code at each section, like for each paragraph, or for, it's much more tedious than using a standard style sheet system. They don't allow you to have access to the overall style sheet for the whole site. And that's kind of the annoying part of something like Canvas. Sorry, go ahead, Beth.
No, you were doing fine. Well, so this one again is creating a page. So practice with close attention to information design, typography, and design principles to format your report on materials and methods for completing your project. So we're down to the, getting close to the wire here. So refining what you've got so far. So firming up your plans for the portfolio look and feel. We've looked at some variations, and right now it seems like contenders would be a small book, a large page folded down, and in all cases, a website, an online representation, which would mean that you'd want to start figuring out what you need in terms of actual materials to create your physical version. And so getting the, between now and next week, identifying those and actually getting them in hand. If you're doing something physical like this kind of thing, you want to actually get that tangible stuff in hand, but it's not really easy to do now. So usually, you can't go down to Palace and get stuff easily, or I don't know if anybody's tried, but I haven't been out. So those kinds of things may still be in the descriptive phase. So if you do decide that you're going to do something that is tangible, then make very clear plans for it. So make a pattern, uh, measure what you're going to be doing. So getting down to the not kind of quasi general, but getting down to the real specifics for that. So if you're going to do something like this, you have to make sure that you knew that the paper that you're after is available in a standard size that you want, and then use that to get very detailed about how it would be going together. So we saw some examples of different faces of the pages having different parts, and deciding where your resume would be on that, and if and how you're going to change it, uh, and thinking about and looking at the kinds of things that Bridget had on her resume at the bottom, so that more about uh, soft skills. I don't know if you'd call it that, but interaction skills, or the curiosity, the inventiveness, resourcefulness, those kinds of things that good communicator, problem solver, the things that are not the tools that you know how to use, but the way that you interact with people in production situations. So kind of projecting yourself forward and manifesting that on within the design, so that the design sort of looks clearly inventive. And there were some ideas that some of you are having to do something that's a little bit unusual, and taking those far forward, and for next week having a clearer idea of how that would go. And so we're getting real. And so this was a book that I read on preparing your portfolios, and they pretty much said they wouldn't. I didn't know about binder clips, but ring binder clips were not so good. So you want to show off your skills at production and fabricating things, and if you're not good at that, don't do that. Don't go that route for your portfolio. So if you feel like you're kind of all thumbs at something, and you're going to, you probably don't want to handcraft a portfolio if you don't feel comfortable with that, unless you somehow on this time off that we have, you're going to learn how to do that stuff. Then that would be something to put in your plan. So getting these things in writing, and then making the writing look good on the page, and making all of your collateral look good together, the letterhead and the resume and the logo and the card. So you're going to do a final draft of your resume. There have been some suggestions. You may not have one resume. You might decide that you're going to have one for your online look, and one for the the 2 pages that are here in your little miniature portfolio fold out booklet thing, that you're going to have the giant poster on the inside that everybody wants to put on their wall right here. So how does that all play out? And so For the draft of your resume, include information that anticipates where you'll be academically. So some of you are right finishing up, and so you would be able to put some of your accomplishments for instance, the part of this class that's about design, you could include that as some of the skills, and some of the skills that you mentioned that you have and while you're thinking about that in the class, um, continue on that kind of path, that frame of mind. So getting the more of those soft skills, and if anybody thinks of ways to help others discover that, then that would be a good thing to do. So we'll give each other suggestions. So use your letterhead, typeset a page or a version of your letterhead. Now you may have a version of your letterhead that's good for one thing, and then you may need to have a letterhead that has a second page or has space for doing a scope agreement or some kind of description of a project. So that kind of thing might not fit onto the letterhead that you created for your resume. So if you are thinking about something like when you get a job, you usually need to uh, submit a creative brief. And so looking up creative briefs and what's involved with that and what all should fit on that page and what looks business-like as thinking about what that should look at like compared to maybe a cover letter. So looking up creative briefs and thinking about how that would fit on your letterhead, and do I need to have a special version of my letterhead for that kind of thing? And Julie, do you think of anything else that you might want to have a letterhead for, or even just a note in
Well,
terms of?
a lot of times, like you know, when you're supposed to write the thank you note or whatever, like thank you for interviewing me. I would do that just kind of via email, so couldn't really put it on a letterhead, but if you have like a signature panel, like you know, you can create different sets of signatures, but you can also put images in there, so you can kind of combine your elements of your logo design for yourself in that as
Right.
well. So it just kind of dresses up your email. I guess you could probably get fancy and use all the coding you learned from John's class in HTML in email. But I don't know. Sometimes I don't know if people's like settings read that.
Yeah. Well, I think that any way that you can distinguish yourself, either by your way of writing or the terms that you use, or something that helps you be remembered if you had an interview, so that there's some kind of an association can be made between what you send visually or say and the interview that you had, so that it would be, you just kind of want to make yourself memorable somehow. And you're really branding yourself in a way.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
so that's part of it. And so this is talking about, again, on the page, if you're listing things that you need to get, like a materials or items that you need to create. Think about how those look in terms of information design. And then you're going to be working on the business card final draft, including your logo. So again, when this says final draft, it still could change before the end of class, but this is getting closer to that. I probably should say semi-final draft because you have 2 weeks left after this, and a lot can happen in that time. But getting really close to the overall look and feel, like I'm seeing that most of you are really nearly there, but we haven't talked about the business card, and that's the one piece that you might actually be passing out or handing around. Also think about looking up costs for a card, and I think the DM8 they go use Move, but it's pretty expensive. I think there are a lot of less expensive places, and knowing what a bleed is, so that when you want to bleed on your card, that you give it to the printer, probably remotely, and they don't have to enlarge it to create a bleed, because they'll do that. They'll try to do that for you, and that won't look right because it won't be the right size anymore. So if you want to bleed, you have to know how to provide that. So this helps me help you. If you have a pretty close version of your business card next week, then I can help you make sure that you're going to get the look you want when you send it to wherever. You might even send it to Mavericks, our local quick print place. They're really nice, and you could just get a few cards just to have something tangible that you can't pass it to anybody because nobody can touch it after you've touched it, but it's something that you'd have waiting there for the future. So getting kind of real with the business card, and then the final draft of the resume with your logo element. And I think most of you are to that point, but after looking at resumes today, you might want to add something or adjust it. So that template resume that I handed out in the first place, we talked about that last week as being just a template and not like a real personal customized piece that would necessarily work for you. So you want to make sure that the resume is really about who you are, and it looked like what I could see from today's, the ones that came in, that's pretty clear, but that you'd want to have that pretty clear, very clear next week. And then the letterhead final draft with your cover letter. So this would be probably doing this report on the cover letter, or you could use your letterhead in a certain way on another layout. So those are pretty flexible how you deliver those. It's just having the information about what you've considered, how you've incorporated it into what you're delivering, and so any changes, there could still be changes between next week and the following week, but just getting it closer to what you need. And then on your letterhead, a materials list for anything that you're going to need for fabricating or producing something that's tangible. And if you're not going to be doing something that's tangible, that last piece should be talking about skills that you need to acquire for getting your work online, if that's going to be the way to go, and how you're going to pick which place you want to show. So Adobe has a portfolio site. There's Behance, and there's which I think looks pretty good. I don't know how much they cost, but finding out about the cost for any thing that you're going to put online and putting that in your materials list, so that if you've decided you're not going to do a physical, tangible portfolio, then talk about what you're going to do for your online portfolio. Talk about how your work is going to appear on the pages. So maybe make a diagram. Look at a lot of portfolio sites to see what works. There's a single image with a lot of white space around it, and just a little bit of informative type looks better than a hoarding of images that you can click on one and it takes it off to another page where it's alone. So look at the different choreographies for the web presence and make those work for you. Think about what you have to show and how that would play out. Also, always along the way, be making things to put in your portfolio. You're your own client right now. Even if you don't have a client and a lot of things to show, then be making up logos for the mysterious client and make up a scenario for them. So having something to show that represents your work at this point is really important. So how would you, if you're going to show 5 pieces, how would you show them? Would you blob them all on one page, or would you string them out, or would you put them on one page and have them linked? And that takes going and looking at as many sites as you can for the kind of thing that you plan to do, and seeing what works for you. And if you get burned out on that, go and take a big break and come back and keep looking. Just go woo, 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 woo.
Yeah, don't get burned out.
Yeah, just get clear, have a night's sleep, and then come back to it in the morning.
Right.
But that's the kind of research we're doing at this point. So we're getting close to the end, and for the next week it would be finishing up whatever you're working on now, and deciding on which pieces are essential. If you have to pare things down to just the card, the letterhead, and the resume, and do you want an extra kind of sheet for doing a creative brief that might have materials and supplies that you would need for doing a job? So looking at the various things that you'd need for doing a project for a client, and see if you need more materials. But essentially, we're just after your identity stuff right now, and anything else would be nice to, if you're thinking about it next week, just have an indication of perhaps a note about what it's going to be. You may want to make, I don't know, bookmarks or something like that, and so that would be something to include. So if you have a new idea for what you'd like to have as part of your package, then that would be something to put in your list and describe. So try to describe everything that you're thinking about. It may not appear in the final, but it's something that you should have in writing so that we can all look at it next week and discuss it.
And we are close to the end. Speaking of being near the end, our 3-hour class is just about over. So don't get burned out.
No burning out. And keep it simple, guys. Keep it simple. There's, you know, I cover for it. No, that's somebody else's. I thought it was like mine.
It's always better to keep things simple. If you're under a deadline, you can always embellish it if you have extra time. But if you make something overly complicated and then you're up against a deadline, you're not going to do as good a job on it. So I always tell my students in my web classes to keep it simple, and then you can always make it more complicated. You can always embellish. It's harder to start complicated and simplify than it is to start simple and then add more flourish.
Right.
So just something to think about.
Right. And if you do have an idea, put it in that list. If you have a brainstorm that just seems like something that you don't want to forget about, possibilities, put it in a heading called possibilities. Or, use your imagination for how you might put that together. So again, that's something to exercise imagination for how you might like to present yourself. Some ideas for stickers or bookmarks or T-shirts or I don't know, something like that. What other ways you could get your presence out there in the world, especially now? How would you do that? Smoke signals. No, how do we? Tiny little party rockets.
Yeah, the world has changed dramatically, and it's a whole new landscape. Everybody's changing what's going on now. So
our reality, considering this reality, you might have some thoughts about ways that you could reach out and connect with people that are not standard, and that would be something to. You might dream about something and wake up in the middle of the night and make sure that gets in there. If it's a cool thing, it's sort of a little bit of brainstorming is good at this point.
Yeah, and creativity in times like these, when there's no rule book and the rules have changed and we're in uncharted territory and this may go on for a while, this is the time to be creative and to think out of the box and to say how can I seize the moment and be different? How can I be creative? Creativity comes out of stuff like this. So
yeah,
there's always silver linings in big clouds.
Well, you guys are all having really good ideas. I can see it from what you're turning in. So that I just keep going with that flow, and then finalizing some of the main ones, so that you feel like you have that it's not in a kind of a rough state anymore. So resume, letterhead, business card. And your letterhead might take two forms, as I was mentioning. It might be something that has your identity on it, but more space or a layout for planning a scope agreement, which would mean that maybe you want to look up the kind of thing that you'd put out there for a project you're working on with a team or something, what your ideas would be. Make up something and write it up and make sure the space can handle it. So it might be a second page to your letter with your identity at the top, or it might be a completely different sort of thing. So think about that kind of thing. So Bridget, are you taking DM6 this semester?
Bridget, you're muted. You can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm taking DM6 right now.
And Jane, you're taking DM6? Yeah. And
Yeah.
Bridget's taking DM6? Yeah. Okay. So, and Julia, are you taking DM6 as well?
I haven't taken it yet. It is on my list of to-dos.
Yep. Well, it'll be there for you
Yay.
next semester.
My work just said they'd pay for it.
I
So.
know that Leslie has been doing a lot of work on her online component of the class, because it's well, it's all going. We're all going to be online in the fall. So it's. I think she's been working on that this semester. It's a really good class for just getting to practice a lot of what we're talking about in here,
Yeah.
and going on in from DM2, taking the type skills that you got in DM2 and taking them into DM6. You also get to play with type in lots of ways, doing custom type for different kinds of jobs, like a record album or something like that you might. So, and then Bridget, are you and Jane, are you handing those in? And they're all PDFs now, right?
I think that's what we're going to be doing. We're trying to figure that out. We might do an EPUB for our final booklet.
Yeah. I just ran across a booklet from a book, actually, from DM6. That was a hardbound book that fellow did several years ago about his travels, and I started looking at it, and when I looked up again, it was an hour later, because he'd gone all of these places that were just so fascinating, and he put them all in his book. Yeah, I found a lot of problems with the formatting, but
Hardbound book?
hardbound book.
What's hardbound book? What is that? What is that? Hardbound book?
What's a book?
What are these things?
Hardbound
Hardbound book? What does that mean? I don't even know. What's a book?
What's a book?
We don't do those anymore. We do too.
Okay, we should probably wrap up, folks, since we're over time.
All right.
Okay.
I gotta go to the store for one thing.
Oh, no.
Wear your mask. Be safe.
Right.
Practice social safeness.
Yeah.
All right. Have a good night, guys.
Bye.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for coming to the
Bye,
party.
thank you.
Thank you all.
Sorry we didn't have anything to drink.
Stay hydrated.
Stay hydrated, stay healthy, wear your mask in public, 6 feet, social distance, don't get sick,
No.
and we'll see you next week.
Okay. Thanks for coming.
Hello, Beth.
Bye.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
So, I think you already said it in the email, but I want to make sure. So, can I take Art 50 for my short credit?